a view or a feeling of what the Board of Inquiry felt that it was doing to prevent harm by coming down to this 0.8 limit? What is the end effect likely to be in terms of?
Look, we're in a very difficult situation at the present time because the Board of Inquiry is still making its final decision. As an applicant to this, I'm not supposed to speculate about, what are they doing or what are they not doing. My purpose here today was to explain to you as councillors that in our view, if this limit remains where it is, the RWSS cannot proceed. If you were to read the 400 odd pages of the decision, you would see, as I said earlier, that there are many places where they say they sought to find a compromise between protecting the environment and enabling good farmers to intensify. I think you could reasonably draw the conclusion from what I've said today that I think they didn't find a satisfactory compromise.
Question. So you're saying that if this proceeds, then we won't meet one of the conditions precedent, and therefore we will not proceed. That's in essence what you're saying.
We won't have a workable consent, which is one of the conditions precedent.
Okay, Councillor Belford.
The 625,000, I think, was your summation of how much N would go in. It does. My recollection is that in the trim model there was a pretty hefty percentage. I forget what the term of art for it is, but attenuation or something like that. It was like 40% of what sort of left the farm, as it were, would not in fact arrive. But this, I think you said in giving this number that you took what you called a conservative approach, that all of it would. Is that right?
Yes, as the slide says, I've assumed that all root zone nitrogen losses arrive in the stream.
Okay.
And there's not a lot of science and rather a lot of art, as I understand it, in estimating what proportion of attenuation there might be.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't sound from your presentation like that you have a great deal of concern about you're concerned about some uncertainties in how the LUC system works in terms of the actual measurement of leaching that would occur, and you've indicated your concern about Overseer 5 and so forth. But it doesn't sound like you're saying that the LUC limits, which is what will confront the farmer in the first instance, are unrealistic?
So again, I think if we look at the slide, it says we think that intensified land use could proceed, but there would be strong limitation on the amount of dairying
in particular, right.
on the light soils. But as the other slide showed, you could do dairying within these limits on the medium and heavy soils.
So that aspect of it is not as it really is the DIN that is your issue. So when we were presented this, and I would have to say that some of us have been trying to talk around to a lot of folks who have looked at LUC limits and leaching, what's achievable or not achievable in different sectors and so on and so forth, and have come away feeling like there is progress to be made there. But anyway, the DIN business, when we were presented this by the staff at the planning committee, regional planning committee, the chief planning consultant to this effort, Rob, whatever his name is, was pressed on the point of whether DIN was a limit or not. And what he said to us was, no, It's not a limit. What he said was that it was a whether you want to call it a target or whatever, but it was a, I don't think he used the word aspirational, but the impression left was that here is a target to be met. That's what has been laid out by this decision. He was then further asked, well, when would this limit, if you view it that way, when would this limit need to be met? And he said, well, there's no date in the Board of Inquiry with respect to that, but if I were speculating, I would say under the freshwater management plan, there's a 20, I think it was 30 or 2035, one or the other date at which one might reasonably infer that's when such a target would need to be met. Similarly, the folks who have been most on the opposite side of this issue from where we have been, Fish and Game, their reading of this is also very clearly and stated in their writings that they read the decision as being a target, if you will, as well, not a limit. So at the end of the day, I assume that the drift of our submission is to really get to that particular point. Is this? I mean, you're absolutely sound. You are convinced this is a limit.
Let's let him answer, Councillor Belvin.
So the words on this screen come from your planning staff. In a limit is a specific thing that differs from a target. A target is a limit to be met in the future. The word limit is used almost everywhere in the draft decision about DIN. There is maybe one place where it's suggested that it might be used as an indicator to monitor progress, but that is outweighed many times by the number of times the word limit is used, and limit has a specific meaning, as I understand it, under the Resource Management Act.
So if the Board of Inquiry were to come back and say, no, you got that wrong, we got it wrong, we meant that to be an indicator, if I'm reading what that is, does your heartburn go away?
I'm not sure that I'm suffering from heartburn, but if it were to be a target to be set at some time in the future, that might help. I still think it would make things quite difficult at this level. And one of our suggestions is that it not be a hard limit now, that it be a limit to be achieved by 2030 or by the end of the first resource consent period or something like that.
And would you think that it must be your reading then that the interpretation of the DIN number as an indicator is a technical change, achievable under the current rethink process the Board of Inquiry is currently in?
Yes, I guess that is what we think, at least in part because what you're allowed to do is address inconsistencies, and we have identified a fundamental inconsistency between the DIN limit, which is not able to be reached with the current LUC proposals.
Right. Yeah. And I guess
I'm sure you're aware of all of this because it's actually posted on the EPA's website, the whole of our submission to them.
Supplementary to that, I have read the HBRIC submission on the EPA website, and it seems to me that what the HBRIC is asking for is an elevated level of nitrogen allowable in the water. But what you're suggesting to Tom now, which I forget wrong, is that the 0.8 would be acceptable if it was sometime in the future an aspirational limit which we had to get to in a particular time. Yeah. Which of those is correct?
I think the former is correct. I've answered a particular question. I don't think we're explicit in our submission about what exact level we would want to have by 2030.
I get that.
Yeah.
But what I heard you answer Tom in a way that seemed to be saying that if the 0.8 would be acceptable,
will be workable if it was set for some time in the future, point 8,
it
which
might
is a different position.
It might be.
Well, then to my last question then, how do you reconcile this to what my understanding is of the one plan and its implementation? There, the DIN limit is 0.44. That's the same limit that has been adopted in Otago.
It's not a limit.
Excuse me?
It's not a limit in the one plan. It's either an indicator or it may be a target, but it is definitely not a limit. And the difference is that a limit is enforceable.
I understand that. I disagree, I guess.
There are only facts.
Ask
there are
the
only
Chief
facts, Tom.
Executive.
Any other questions? Mr. Moy.
So the 0.8, is that safe drinking water for a human being once it's been treated?
So the maximum level that is globally accepted for drinking water for human beings is 11.2 milligrams per litre. That's the World Health Standard, and it's adopted by legislation in New Zealand. Most places in New Zealand try to have a working limit of 5.6 milligrams per litre, so that they've got 50% safety margin in drinking water. The toxicity limits for fish are significantly lower than that. The ones that the council proposed at 95% protection against toxicity of 2.4 milligrams per litre is, in round numbers, a quarter of the human health standard. And what the board has chosen to use is a level that is 1/3 of what the council proposed on the basis of toxicity to fish. It is an extremely low level of nitrogen, of dissolved inorganic nitrogen. It is not as low as you would expect in natural forest, for example, but it is the kind of level that you would expect for not very much or maybe even no intensified agriculture. And I guess the proof of the pudding of that is that in a catchment of 72,000 hectares or whatever it is in the Tuki, where only about 6,000 are intensively are developed under intensive agriculture, the current levels are significantly above 0.8.
So I did hear in Central Hawke's Bay an indicator of some of the males in the district being subject to the higher limits that they lose their hair.
It's entirely possible.
Mr. Chair, I have a few more questions.
That explains some things, Councillor.
Right. Before I have the question, Andy, I appreciate you coming along. You know, this is your core competency, and you're a scientist, and so you have an advantage on us. You're a scientist with a lot of experience in this field, and I guess our problem is that we've been trying to get our brains around these issues, and we either rely on your judgment or on the judgment of the rest of HBRIC, but in all responsibility, we've sort of had to go out and find some other things as well and talk to other people. And I think it's a bit of a tragedy, really, that we don't have someone sitting alongside you who has a different view, because there are people with a different view. You seem to understand the horizon one at 0.44 as a target or an objective, whatever it is, but it's certainly 0.44, and we're messing around with some words which could mean a lot, could mean nothing, could be easy to change, could be hard to change. So you can see the problem that we're all having, because, and here comes some of my questions, because one of the experts that I've been talking to says that only 10% of the rivers in New Zealand don't get to the 0.8. Now, looking at the rivers you just pointed up, certainly that's not the case in Hawke's Bay. So I'm really interested in a point of view on that, and I think I'd like to get this Horizon one clarified too, because they're sitting on 0.44 and we're sitting on 0.8, and we're all moaning. So, understanding this issue and the importance of it without conflict, and, you're seriously conflicted here. And I don't mean that in a cruel and vicious way, but you're also chairman of HBRIC that's trying to build a dam, which you've just said yourself is absolutely determined. It's more than severely challenged if this goes ahead. So you can see our dilemma. And I'm a little bit...
Chairman, for the record, I do not have a conflict here.
Well, we just have to... That's my opinion. Because, I read the Listener, and I just want to know...
For the record, Chairman, I do not have a conflict here. I am reporting to my shareholders to inform
in terms
you...
of delivering information. Can I just carry on? Because I've got another point here. And you raised at the beginning about people in the press and they may be reported improperly or not. Well, I can just let you know, from my point of view, I have been reported dead accurately. So just in case you've got a problem with that, I have. Just want to know whether you've been reported dead accurately. He say in the Listener, which is a national publication, he says that the numbers underpinning the interim decision don't pass the sanity check. Is that saying...
That is exactly what I said.
That's exactly what you said.
Yep, and they don't pass the two sanity tests that I just explained.
Can I just say there's a couple of things to cover here for you.
So, I did say they don't pass the sanity check.
Oh, please that you report.
And there is why. The only test that the board applied about whether or not their decision bore resemblance to reality was to consider whether or not 0.8 was okay in relation to Tuki at Red Bridge. They appear not to have considered at all that all of these other rivers are substantially above their DIN limit. I think that's a sanity check. They also didn't assess the question that Councillor Scott asked me. So if you take the land use capability class emissions allowances, which you've set in one set of rules, and add them up over all of the catchment, does that bear any relationship to the dissolved inorganic nitrogen level that you set in the river? The answer is clearly no, it doesn't. That's the second sanity check that does not appear to have been done. In my opinion, those sanity checks were not done. It's as simple as that.
There's another allegation made about conflict because you're, as chair of HBRIC and obviously the running this process on RWSS, which I personally take a bit of issue at, but I'd like to hear your view on that.
So we have been, in HBRIC, we have been assigned a task which is to carry this proposal through the financing and consenting and other processes and report back to you on whether or not an investment should be made by you in us to do this, subject to a series of conditions precedent. One of those conditions precedent is a workable set of resource consents. I'm reporting back to you today that the current Plan Change 6 rules will not give us a workable resource consent, in our opinion. I am here giving you information as my shareholders. I do not have a conflict. I am not charged with building the dam, nor are my colleagues. We are charged with making a recommendation to you as to whether or not those conditions precedent have been passed. One of your colleagues is on record in the press as saying that my colleagues and I intend to have this built, irrespective of cost to the environment or anything else. I personally find that an unacceptable comment. A person this morning described us as selling this proposition to the Board of Inquiry. I don't believe any of those things are accurate, and I certainly, and I will say again for the record, I do not have a conflict here in presenting this information to you.